Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. I'm chatting with Steph Geddes, who is a registered nutritionist who seamlessly blends her culinary creativity with her nutrition expertise to make healthy simply delicious. Working with brands, products, and people, she translates nutrition evidence into delicious food so you can enjoy eating healthy and feel great without the overwhelm. Steph has a particular interest in family nutrition as she is a mum of 2 toddler boys. She's very passionate about helping parents to simplify mealtimes, to bring more enjoyment and nourishment to everyone at the table, and to raise a generation of food-loving children. I hope you get a lot out of this episode where we discuss a lot about family nutrition and practical strategies for navigating all sorts of different nutrient requirements, taste preferences, navigating children who are fussy or picky eaters, and so much more. Steph, welcome to the podcast. Now, Steph and I go quite a little way back. We met, I think it was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago now?
Yeah, I think on that Cobram Estate trip, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while. So Steph and I met, Cobram Estate, who make beautiful Australian extra virgin olive oil, run these yearly harvests where they take people to their olive groves and you get to experience like how they produce their extra virgin olive oil and get all the education around that, have a beautiful lunch in the groves, and it's like a nutritionist and foodie's dream. And so Steph and I met there. I was studying nutrition at the time. Steph's been working as a nutritionist, and then we've both had these different career paths in nutrition. So Steph, I wanted you to share a little bit about like what led you to becoming a nutritionist and your passion around, I guess, that family nutrition, culinary nutrition, and the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. So when I first started out, it was, really the only avenue that you knew to go down was to do private practice, working one-on-one with clients. So I sort of started there once I had my qualification as a registered nutritionist, and I sort of soon realized that most of my passion and what lit me up about nutrition was actually the food side of it. So I had, I was working with clients, but my favorite part of working with them was actually creating recipes for them. And, I'd write recipes from scratch, and I was always in my kitchen, like testing different things for my clients. And eventually just a few opportunities popped up, which was really more recipe development space, working with cafes and that sort of thing. Once dietary restrictions were sort of becoming more mainstream, people were looking for gluten-free and vegetarian and stuff at cafes, and their chefs didn't quite feel comfortable to, change their recipes or bring in new ones to accommodate for that. So they were seeking out me to sort of help with that. And that's when I sort of fell into the land of recipe development and the whole culinary nutrition space. And I just absolutely loved it. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to not pursue that private or one-on-one consulting anymore, and I'm just going to focus on this. And yeah, that's sort of how I fell into the culinary nutrition side. And then I suppose naturally I've just found a love for family nutrition because I've got 2 young boys, and I've really been thrown in the deep end when it comes to navigating little one's food journey. My eldest is what you would, I guess, classify as a fussy eater. I do prefer the term non-adventurous eater, but for the sake of it, we'll say a fussy eater. And so it really just opened my eyes up to a whole new world of family nutrition. And, I suppose really realizing that it's not as simple as just cooking up a meal and serving it to your family. There's just so many other pieces to the puzzle, and really trying to create and raise children that are just, food lovers. I didn't want to, even though he might be a fussy eater, my younger one isn't so much, but I just really was conscious of raising them to have a really healthy relationship with food as well. So I've sort of, done a lot of study in that area now. And so I really love that whole family nutrition side of it as well.
Amazing. I think, you're going to be so helpful to so many people when it comes to like navigating nutrition with children, helping them to like encourage like, I guess that healthy relationship with food. I also love like the culinary side of nutrition, because I think for the work you do, particularly around like creating recipes for people, it's like the practical side, like how to make healthy eating and how to make nutrition achievable, like is actually through the food we eat. So it just makes it like that really practical, achievable, like sort of tangible side of nutrition. But I'm so keen to dive in and talk about family nutrition. There's so much involved in this. I've got a little one as well. He's nearly 3. And whilst I have to admit I haven't navigated that like non-adventurous or fussy eating so much with him, he's still a toddler, and they still have like, from day to day, one day they'll like something, the next day they don't, or there's just so much involved in that. So I guess I'd love to start with like the big question, like how do we actually navigate nourishing ourselves, like whether it's ourselves as a mom, as a couple, as a family, but also navigating our whole family's needs, like our toddlers or our children's, when we all have different nutritional needs, different taste preferences. Like, is it actually possible to serve one meal to the whole family, rather than, I guess, juggling so many different meals and needs?
Yeah, look, I think, the big thing is that it's so complex when it comes to feeding a family. There's so many, not only, human beings to feed, but it's also their situations and what's going on for them. So like you said, their nutritional needs, but, what's their energy expenditure like? What rate of growth development are they at? Like so many different things to consider. And I think one of the biggest things I like people to question for themselves is, what is the notion of a family meal? And a lot of people get stuck into just this habit, this routine of doing kids' meals versus adult meals. And that was a real kind of realization for me, because I got stuck in that sort of routine of just going, when my youngest was a newborn and I had a nearly 2-year-old, and my husband works late a lot. So I found myself just doing like kid meals for him. And then I do, my meal, my husband's meal later. And I just got into this routine where I was like, this actually isn't working for us, because I'm trying to keep track of what he's having, but he's really just having like kid meals. So, sometimes you do tend to repeat certain foods with them, particularly if they're fussy. But I wasn't even thinking about, what do I want to eat? And I'm such a foodie and I love, trying different foods and stuff. And so I really felt like I was missing out, because I was just basically cooking up whatever I could be bothered by the time I'd done kids' dinner and all of that. And I was like, no, let's take a step back. The end goal for us is to sit down as a family and for everyone to eat the same meal together. Even though that might seem like such a long way away, particularly if you've got a fussy eater, I was like, how am I going to approach it if that is the end goal? And so I decided, no, we need to be having more family meals together. And we actually now do family meals 7 nights a week, not because I'm like trying to flex that that's how good I am, but I'm like, that's just the routine that we're in now. And I actually find that easier, because it did take a little bit of getting into the habit of prepping earlier and stuff, but it meant that once I actually got dinner done, say we eat at about 5:30, I didn't have to do the whole bedtime routine and then have to go back into the kitchen and cook again, because now at that time of the night, I'm just cactus. And I think, how was I doing that before? Like, no way could I do that now. So what I like people to think about is, okay, well, you can actually serve the one meal to everyone, but it's this concept that we call let's consider and not cater for everyone. So when we sit down to serve the meal, let's consider where everyone's at, but let's not cater for them to the point where we're cooking different meals for everyone. So what I suggest is, let's pick a family meal, and I'll use an example that we did last night. We're doing one of my meal plans at the moment. Last night it was chicken parmesanas with sweet potato chips and salad. Now, I know that not everyone in my family likes all of those elements, but that's okay. Okay, I'm just picking the one meal. And I'm going, all right, where's everyone at today? And I go, okay, for myself, I actually didn't get to exercise yesterday. So in terms of like overall energy expenditure, it wasn't high. So I'm probably going to need a smaller portion of certain things on my plate. My husband, he was on his feet all day working and he exercised, so he's going to need a lot more. So that was one thing I was considering. I know that my fussy eater, he doesn't like chicken. So I was going to have to work out how I could serve that to him. And I know that salad is a little bit tricky for both of my boys, because my youngest is only just turned 2. So certain raw vegetables and stuff for him can be a choking risk. So it was understanding how I could serve that to him that's appropriate for him as well. So, basically what I ended up doing was having their plates sitting out while I was preparing everything. And what I would do is go, okay, well, I know that I didn't get to exercise much today. My carbohydrate portion might be a little bit smaller today. So I'm serving a little bit less of the sweet potato fries, but I know I need lots of protein still. So I've still got my chicken parma and I'm having salad. My husband's having basically the same thing, but a bigger serving because that's what he needs. When it came to the kids, they were having the same elements, but I just served them a little bit differently according to how they needed. So for my son, because he doesn't love chicken, I made sure that I cut it up in a way that was most appealing to him. He likes little tiny bite-sized pieces. So I did that for him. And I left off the cheese and the tomato paste because as soon as he sees that, he'll just push it away straight away. Whereas
Yeah.
my other son, he was fine. I could just chop up the Parmigiana for him. That was fine. But in terms of the salad ingredients, I had to mix that up a little bit and again, serve it in a way that was appropriate for him and his age. And then I also added, I think, just something extra on the plate to make sure I was ticking all the boxes nutritionally, making sure they were getting what they wanted. But essentially, I hadn't had to cook a separate meal at all. It was just using the same components of the family meal, but just considering them and serving it to them in a way that I knew was most appealing and hopefully, cross your fingers, most likely that they would give it a go.
I love that. I think that makes it so practical and is really helpful from that point of view. Because I know we do something really similar without sort of realizing, the terminology you use and how you sort of put that all together. But we do something really similar with my family. And I know that for a lot of my clients, whilst, family nutrition is not my specialty, I work with a lot of women. Some of those women are mothers. And I think their biggest struggle is like, I need to make these nutrition changes for myself, but how am I going to incorporate that into feeding my family? Because what happens with a lot of them is they concentrate on feeding their kids and they sort of forget about themselves. And then they'll, rather than making themselves dinner or a meal, or it might be lunch, they're sort of scrounging around the pantry and just grabbing any old snack and thing to have instead of sitting down for a proper meal. Because like you said, like they just don't have the energy after feeding their children to then be like making a whole nother meal and feeding themselves. So I think that makes it really practical and really helpful for people in actually navigating like feeding your whole family and understanding like those different nutritional needs, even like portion sizes, right? Because we're the same. Like my husband and I, we eat the same for dinner, but we have different needs when it comes to portion sizes. So yeah, I really, really love that. I know you mentioned before about I want to just kind of explain the terminology for people who might not have heard it, but you sort of mentioned about like your son being a non-adventurous eater. And I really like that term rather than using like fussy or picky eating, because I think particularly if they hear that, I don't know, like what's your thoughts on that? Like just the use, like I don't know, your thoughts on like the use of wording around that.
Yeah, look, I think, it's hard because everyone just identifies and knows what we mean when we say a fussy or a picky eater. But
Yeah.
you're right, a lot of the time when we're saying it, we are saying it in front of them. And it's not just also about, I think, the word that you're saying, but it's also how you're saying it too. So sometimes if I'm talking to my friends and they'll be like, oh, how are mealtimes going for you, whatever, and I might be like, oh, he's such a fussy eater, and roll my eyes when I say it.
Yeah.
Kids pick up on so much and they can easily pick up on that. And straight away, they're going to be feeling guilty and feeling shame, like, oh, I'm not doing something right or I'm doing it wrong. And, it's already hard enough to navigate mealtimes with someone who's a non-adventurous eater. So just adding another layer of complexity and feelings that maybe they're not doing it right or they're not being a good, child or whatever it might be. We just don't need that. So I like the term non-adventurous because I think what it really shows is that, and the thing with being a non-adventurous kid is it's really common with kids that are just cautious with a lot of aspects in their life. And it made so much sense to me. I questioned so many times, like, was it something I did that made him a fussy eater and all of this? And when I realized, he's actually just quite non-adventurous in a lot of aspects of his life. Like he's non-adventurous when it comes to play. We're at the playground. My youngest will be climbing on everything and jumping on everything. And, you got to really keep an eye on him. Whereas my eldest, who's the non-adventurous eater, he'd be much more hesitant. He'd like to see someone else do it before he does it. Or he'd be like, Mum, could you help me with this? Or, so it just made so much sense for his personality that he would also be non-adventurous with eating. And I just figured, well, it's like when I'm at the playground with him, I'm not going to force him to do things that he wouldn't want to do at the playground, right? I would really just nurture that within him and just gradually let him and his development learn to be a bit more adventurous with that. And I thought, well, that's exactly what you've got to do with the food as well. You can't control it. You can't pressure it. You just need to really take a step back and understand that, yep, this is quite normal. And of course, if you've got concerns, definitely go and see a pediatric dietitian to get one-on-one advice. But it is very common for kids to go through what we call fussy periods. And so if they're going through that, you really do just need to be like, okay, this is just like any other form of development for them. It's just taking them a little bit of time to get used to things. Let's just nurture that instead of trying to be like, I need to control this. I need to pressure them to do it properly. And, because that just really doesn't help the situation at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really nice way of like removing the guilt from parents as well and helping them understand like why this might be happening and then like what the steps are or who they can get support from to, I guess, work through any of that and to just, to help encourage and nurture like a positive relationship with food with their children. Can you like just kind of a little bit on that topic, can you share with listeners about like something that I've heard called the division of responsibility when it comes to serving food to your kids? So instead of like, I'm sure you're familiar with that term or like understand what I'm talking about, but just to share with them what that kind of means and how it kind of takes away the pressure of, or just putting any pressure on your kids around eating certain foods.
Yeah, so the division of responsibility, I think, is so great for parents in this situation. So, of course, it helps the children, but with parents, we do feel so guilty, when our kids aren't eating well or we think they're not getting enough food and we really worry. And as much as you would like to control and make them eat something, it just is not possible. And so the division of responsibility essentially means defining what your responsibility is as a parent at mealtimes and what is your child's responsibility at mealtimes. And so for the parent, you decide where, when, and what is being served, and your child decides how much they want to eat and if they want to eat at all. And once you can kind of step back and look at it like this, you really do see, okay, there are certain things I can control in this situation. I can tick my boxes for what I need to do, but I cannot control how much my child is going to eat. And so what you really need to think about is, all right, so I'm deciding the when, the where, and the what. So, where are we eating? We're going to eat at the table with the whole family together. When are we eating? Making sure you've got structured meal times and snack times with your children so that they can come to the table with a bit of an appetite. And then what you're serving them. Okay, so what you're serving them is just you deciding what that family meal is and what is available for them to eat at that meal. They decide out of what you've put in front of them, which parts of it, how much, and if at all they want to eat.
Yeah, I think that's so important to share. And I will say, even as a parent, that takes practice because I know that sometimes I sit down at family mealtime with my family and my, little one, and he's nearly 3, and my nutritionist hat goes on sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I go, oh gosh, he's got to eat that protein to keep his blood sugars balanced. And I want him to eat that veggie and I want him to eat this. And I don't want him to just, decide that he wants to get up from the table because he's, active and that's what, that's what he does sometimes. And so, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And it does take practice, but just something to keep reminding yourself about, because I know that I've got to be really cautious not to, to even be pressuring and be like, come on, just one more mouthful of that protein or one more mouthful of this. And it's navigating that, it can be really, really interesting.
Yeah, of course. And look, as well, like it's not how we grew up either. And I think that's the biggest challenge for parents is it was very different when we were growing up. And that's just because that's all our parents knew, it's no shade on them for that's how they did it, but that's all they knew at the time. But we know different now. And so the best thing is that we can do it differently. And we know that pressuring kids to eat is probably the least helpful thing that we can do, but it is so hard, like you're saying, not to just do it. And you think you're just doing a gentle bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
But really, any kind of encouragement that's direct is pressure for them. Okay. And you can imagine that feeling. I mean, you might remember, maybe you grew up with things like you're not leaving the table till you eat your vegetables, or you're only getting dessert if you finish your meal and all that sort of stuff. And what that really does is it disconnects that ability for our children to trust their intuition and to trust their hunger signals themselves. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that that stays intact forever with children. It's much more simple with children when they begin to eat. When they sit down to a meal, really all they're thinking is, this tastes good or this doesn't taste good. And then, oh, I'm full now, or I want to keep eating now. And really, in summary, it's not that simple, but obviously in summary, that's really all that's going on for them. Whereas you think about an adult when they're eating a meal, we have these thoughts like, oh, is this too many calories? Or like you said, is this enough protein? Am I getting enough protein? Or, oh, I probably shouldn't be eating this many carbs. I'm gonna have to go to the gym tomorrow and work it off. All of these thoughts go through our heads, and these are just things that we've been exposed to growing up. And essentially, they're all just made up rules, really, that have come into our head. And so it's like, we don't want that to happen to our children because all those thoughts just disconnect us further and further from being able to trust our body and trust our body around food. So we really want for children for that to stay intact and for them to just eat intuitively. It's amazing when you really actually do sit back and let them navigate it themselves. You'd actually be quite amazed at how good they are at doing that, knowing when they're full. Even if you gave them freedom with foods like chocolate and things like that. We had Easter not that long ago, and I shared how I actually didn't restrict the amount of chocolate that my kids were eating. What I did do, because remember, you're always in control of the what that's there, right? So what I did do was I did control how much chocolate was in their vicinity because it was just absolutely crazy. Once we got together with all the cousins, I think there was like 250 eggs or something ridiculous. So what I did was like, okay, they don't need 250 eggs, right, available to them. But I maybe picked out 5 to 6 eggs, okay, which is more than what they would eat on a normal day if they were having, chocolate or lollies or something like that. And I just gave that to them and was like, that's yours for the day. You can do what you want with it. And I was amazed to see that they actually just ate one or two. And then they were like, yeah, okay, I'm done now. My eldest son just was like, can you keep hiding these for me? Like all day, we just had to keep re-hiding the eggs for him. He didn't actually eat them even when he found them. But, I was really amazed. And I was like, you know what? It's so true. When we actually do let them trust themselves and we trust them to do that, they really can self-regulate really well and know and listen to their body when they've had enough.
Yeah, I think I've had a few instances as well with my toddler surprising me in just his ability of being able to go, no, that, just have a little bit and then that's all he needed. And I didn't need to step in and do anything about that. Like he just they know when they're full, they know when they're hungry. I think, yeah, it's over time that becomes a little bit messy. And as we get older and we have this emotional connection to food, or we have, an upbringing, like I know my husband, we've talked about this a lot, but he sort of grew up and, his parents didn't know any different, of course. And he grew up in sort of you can't leave the table until everything on your plate is finished. And we're very particular about not having that rule in our house. And, if my toddler says, he says, my belly's full, and we're like, oh, you don't have to eat anymore. So just letting him just know when he's hungry and know when he's full, and him being able to use his intuition and know that I think is really important.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just looking at the bigger picture. Like we get so hyper focused on that exact meal that we're sitting there. And like you said, particularly with our nutritionist brain, we're going, oh, but what about how much protein have they had? What about this? What about that? But having a fussy eater has really made me just step back and look at the bigger picture and go, no, what I would rather hear is for him to build really healthy habits around food, as opposed to me worrying about this particular meal and has he had enough of X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more, and like just with yourself with navigating a non-adventurous eater, and how can other people, I guess, navigate that if their child's the same? How can they, encourage their child to try different foods? Like, where do you start with that?
Look, there's so many different ways you can go about it. And I think the biggest thing for us was taking on, all the advice that the experts suggest, but tweaking them for your child. That was the biggest thing for us. I was like trying all these different things with him, but realizing that actually just doesn't work for my child. And no one knows your child better than you do. So taking on the advice, but tweaking it according to how your child is and how they are around food. And I think one of the most effective things for us has been games. So games and making food fun at the table. Because we do try and do like a no pressure environment at the table, you're no longer going, just have one more bite of this, or just try this, or, holding a fork up to their mouth to help them try. Like none of that works at the end of the day. In fact, it just makes things worse. So we had to come up with another way to encourage them to try new foods, but without putting that pressure on. And we found that games and making food fun was just the best way to do that. And I know that it can sound a little bit exhausting when you think, oh my gosh, like by the time you sit down at mealtime, you just would rather sit there and eat a meal in peace. But the reality of it was either like, let's play some games and have a bit of a laugh at the table. Or the other option is let's sit here and have tantrums and meltdowns at the table and it not be enjoyable for anyone. So I was like, I'd take games, a little bit of extra effort, and take games and fun any day over that. So we just started doing like simple stuff at the start. Like it was like, can you roll your pea in your hand? And can you stack your cucumbers on top of each other? And then eventually, once my husband and I sort of, caught on to the idea of how it can work, we would just come up with all kinds of different games all the time. And like a recent one we did was with chicken skewers. And we were having chicken skewers and my son doesn't really like meat. So I thought, okay, he's probably not going to eat that, but that's okay. It goes on his plate anyway. We know that exposure to different foods is key. And so it's always about exposing them to those foods. They need and look, the research says up to 15 times, but I can guarantee you that it's more than that. Okay. It can take years of exposing them to those foods before they're willing to try it. But what happened in this instance was we put the meal down, we let him navigate the plate. So he was allowed to choose how much he wanted, what he wanted to eat. And we noticed towards the end of the meal that the chicken skewer was still sitting there, hadn't been touched. And in fact, my youngest hadn't even touched his either. And so my husband and I picked up our chicken skewers and we started having a sword fight with them and just playing with them at the table. And then my husband goes, I'm going to take a big bite of my sword. And he takes a really exaggerated big bite of his skewer. And then, of course, straight away, the two boys do exactly the same thing. Okay. And then my youngest continued to pretty much eat all of it. The elder one, he only, probably had 2 or 3 bites. But that was a huge win for us, and you know what? It would have still been a win even if he'd just been comfortable enough to pick it up and play with it. Because what we have to remember is there's like a transition period to acceptance of a new food. And, it can start off with things like just tolerating a food. So sometimes when kids are really fussy, even putting a food on their plate in front of them is enough to send them over the edge, right? And you haven't even mentioned about them trying it. So the first step is like tolerating food. And then it might be being able to interact with the food. So they might even be happy to talk about the food. And then it might be things like smelling the food, touching the food, tasting the food before actually eating the food. So that's why so many exposures is so important, because you need to give them lots of opportunities to work through that transition to acceptance. Yeah. And so exposure, again, it doesn't have to be food on their plate in front of them at the table. It can be so many other things. And this has been really helpful for us as well, where we take advantage of other opportunities of exposure that have been really great for him. So being at the supermarket and being like, oh, tomatoes, could you pick them up for mum and put them in the basket? And so him seeing the tomatoes is one thing, him naming the tomatoes is another, but being comfortable enough to pick them up and touch them and put them in the basket, that's another win. Okay, so they're all really great exposures. Can you grow food in your garden, or can you go past someone's house even that just has a veggie patch and point out different foods? Can you have a book at home that they can go through that has all kinds of different foods in it that they can look at? I used to have pajamas for the boys that had lots of different foods on it, and we'd point them out and name them and all of that. So all of that sort of stuff counts as exposure and is all, really important. And then, yeah, I guess like the exposure, the games, modeling is so important as well. Like watching you, they really do, it's like monkey see, monkey do. They really do watch and copy what you do. So modeling as much as possible. Another thing that we found really helpful, and this is actually backed by a recent study in 2023, was by keeping your children at the table for on average another 10 minutes longer than really when they want to get out, actually showed that they increased the amounts of fruits and vegetables that they ate. And funnily enough, it didn't increase the other foods on the plate, but just the fruits and vegetables. So games and fun was a great way to do that because it would keep them at the table for a bit longer. But conversation, conversation at the table is just so helpful. And I'm not talking about conversations about food. In fact, it's better to not talk about the food. Just conversations like, how was your day today? What did you do today? Have you read any new books lately? You can even, what's your favorite animal? What noise does this animal make? Any kind of conversation that doesn't involve the food is great. And there's so many benefits to family mealtimes, but obviously that, connection with your family and bonding time is great. But we've also seen in the studies that family mealtimes can actually be better at improving literacy skills than reading your child a book.
Oh,
And
so fascinating.
yeah, and that's because of that communication factor. You're
Yeah.
sitting at the table and you're talking about your day and you're conversing and all of that. So conversation at the table, again, not only to increase the time they're at the table, but you get those other wonderful benefits of connection and communication. All of that as well is really helpful. So I think they're some of my main tips. Like, it's very complex, fussy eating,
Yeah,
but
of
they're some
course.
of my main tips that I would say have helped us a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And I was going to ask you about like the importance of family meal times, which you've touched on there. I definitely have taken, even for myself, taken some key things away that I think, even making it more fun and having games and stuff at the table. Because I know whilst, my son's pretty okay with food, there's definitely certain foods that he just does not touch, and I do expose them to him all the time. But our biggest challenge with him is getting off the table and wanting to get off the table. Like, he'll
Mm.
eat a little bit and then he's like, cool, I just want to go and play. And it's like our biggest challenge is actually keeping him on the table. And yeah, just get, but I do know when we do keep him on there, he will eat more off his plate if he is sitting there for longer. Because yeah, I think in his mind, he's just like, I just want to go and play. Like, my toys are over there. And I was busy doing that before dinner time. So I think, yeah, having the fun and games and stuff at the table is definitely something that I'm going to try. I also wanted to reiterate the point you made around like exposing children to food multiple times, and it, potentially taking years, but also the other ways of exposing them to food as well. Because I think, and something that I've heard from, friends or family and other people that I've spoken to that really struggle with their children with food is, giving it to them once or twice and going, well, I know they just won't eat it, so I just won't bother. And so I think it's a really great point you made around, yes, exposing can be, putting it on their plate without forcing them or pressuring them or, trying to push them into eating it. It can be so many other ways of exposing them to the foods. We also love, when I go to the grocery store and we get like veggies and produce and stuff, my son loves helping, like we go through the self-serve checkout and he loves like helping pass the food to me. So as he's passing them, I'm like, oh, what's this one? What, and like he names like the veggies and things like that. So it's kind of nice to know. I didn't realize, but nice to know that that can kind of be an exposure as well.
Yeah, totally. And that's it. And it's even the things like, when you get home, can they help you unpack into the fridge? Or when you're prepping dinner, can you give them a little kid knife and can they help you? Of course, we know getting them involved in the cooking and preparing is so helpful for them. One other thing that I have actually found really great is, if your child has like a favorite character or like a TV show that they love or something like that, taking those little opportunities where they might see, for example, my son loves Blippi. And one day he was watching Blippi and Blippi was eating pizza. And I was like, oh, that pizza looks really yummy, because the thing with fussy eaters is sometimes you can't even get them to eat food like pizza. And so I was like, well, what about pizza? We could try pizza like Blippi. And he was like, yeah, I'd like to try pizza. And he, at this stage, was not eating any mixed meals. So every meal, all elements of the meal had to be separate for him. He didn't like things touching and all of that. So I was like, okay, great. I'm going to jump on this opportunity. I scrapped our dinner plans for that night and I decided we were doing pizza. And he actually ate pizza. And still to this day, pizza is the only mixed meal that he will eat. So yeah, just like taking opportunities like that. Sometimes even when I might go to put a show on for him when he gets home from kinder, it might be like a cooking show that's on. And he actually quite likes cooking shows because he's really interested in what they're doing. And so if you see they're making something, just be like, oh, we could make that. Do you want to make that? And of course they want to, because it's something new and exciting for them. So they'll be like, yeah, okay. And so, just jumping on opportunities like that where you can start to bring in a bit more exposure and new foods for them too.
Love it. I'm also really like mindful around the language we use around food. And so I wanted to talk about like your thoughts on promoting healthy eating with kids, being really neutral around language. So not using like good and bad and treats. And I think it's really important the way that we talk about food and how that can impact them, later on in life as well. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. So we refer that as neutral language with food and food neutrality. And really what that means is not attaching any moral value to food. And look, it's quite a tricky thing to get your head around because it's definitely not something that I certainly didn't grow up with. But it means removing all judgment of food. So, and it's judgment of the food itself, but it's also judgment of yourself or others for eating that food too. So, it's like I sort of said, sometimes when adults make food choices, if they've got all these food rules in their head, they might be saying to themselves, oh, that wasn't a healthy food. Um, like I'm such a weak person. I can't believe I couldn't have discipline enough to not eat that food. And we make connections with our self-worth and who we are as a person according to our food choices,
Mm.
which who's to say that that food was actually healthy or not healthy anyway? Like they've made that up in their head, but maybe that's not true and it depends on the context and the person and everything. So we don't just judge the food, we also judge ourselves for making the choices around those foods. And so it's removing all of that and just going, all food is equal and all food should be seen as the same.
Mm.
And when we do that, what we really allow is for kids to be competent around all foods. And I think that should be the most essential lesson when children are young, before we start trying to educate them about what's healthy and what's not healthy. At that age, that's not particularly helpful for them, right? Because we don't want them to straight out from the back be judging themselves about whether they've made a good or a bad food choice, right? We just want them to be competent, happy eaters that are happy to enjoy and explore all kinds of foods. And if we can ingrain those habits early, then there's time for them to learn about healthy foods and what might not be as healthy. And, things like using the word treat, it's like, well, why are we calling it a treat? Like, why don't we just call it a lolly? Why don't we just call it a chocolate and name it as it actually is? And even the way you speak about food, like I know, if a child has ice cream and tells you they had ice cream, a really natural reaction for most people is to go, wow, you got to have ice cream. And what does that tell that child straight away? That ice cream's like this
Oh.
food, yeah, that needs to be up on a pedestal that's like, oh my gosh, like ice cream. Like if your child came to you and said, oh, I had broccoli today, are you going, wow, you've had broccoli today? Like probably not. So, it's just about, yeah, removing all of that from food and just really allowing it to be neutral. And so not saying to kids, this is good or this is bad. Food is just food. And what this really helps kids do is and as well, like exposing them to all different kinds of foods as well. And this is a tricky one, I think, when parents are just trying to do their best and they do want to give their kids healthy food. And essentially you are in control, remember, of what you are serving to your kids. But if you can expand that a little bit and give them exposure to all different kinds of foods, it means that when they start to grow up and say they go to things like parties, now, when they're younger, you're generally with them and you'll probably feel like you can control a little bit what they're doing at a party. But there's going to be times when you're not there and they're going to be at parties or they're going to be in situations where they have to navigate the food that's on offer. Now, say, for example, party food, if it's something that you've always restricted for them, when they get to a party and you're not there and they've got freedom with that food, they're going to be so excited. They're not going to be able to approach that food with calmness and control,
Yeah.
right? They're just going to be so excited. They're probably going to want to overdo it. But if they'd had quite a bit of exposure, and I'm not talking about just going free for all with food, again, you are in control of what is available to them, but giving them, maybe once or twice a week exposure to those kinds of foods means that they can learn to be calm and in control and relaxed around that kind of food so that when they grow up and they're in those different situations, they'll be the same around that food then. And by then, that's when you'll really notice, oh, the whole plate of fairy bread was there for them to have, but they just had 2 bites of their piece and that was enough for them.
Yeah.
Whereas a kid that might be really excited because they never get to eat that, well, it's going to create that desire for that food when we restrict something, and then they are more likely to overeat. So, it's just about, yeah, really giving them that neutral exposure, really allowing them to be comfortable around all kinds of foods.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. And that's something that I was really mindful of with exposing my son to all different types of foods. Because, of course, like, I came into it going, I really want to, ensure that he's getting all this nutrition and I'm making him all these nutritious meals. And I come to it from the perspective of like, I am able, like, I do provide him with lots of nutritious meals. And so it's really important that he is also exposed. He has been exposed to like ice cream and whatever else it may be. And we don't treat that any differently to any other food, for exactly the reasons that you've talked about. Like, we want to promote that healthy relationship with food. We want them to be able to see all foods as equal so that they can come into that and navigate being exposed to those foods with a lot more ease.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, on the practical side of things, can we talk about like meal prep? How can meal prep, I guess, simplify your life when it actually comes to bringing this all together? And, whether it be planning and prepping and shopping, like what do you do to help, I guess,
Yeah,
remove
look, I think one of the hardest things that I found around feeding a family was the shopping side of it. And so I found that when I actually simplified the shopping process, it made things so much easier because, like, I'll be honest, I actually don't meal plan that often and I don't meal prep that often. I do think it's incredibly helpful for people when you do it, but because it's my job to be creative with food and develop recipes, I'm constantly like making things up on the fly. And I get a veggie box every week, an organic veggie and fruit box, and I never know what's coming in it. So I have to be, a little bit flexible with that. But what I did find the most helpful was really streamlining the shopping process. And so what I found was helpful was absolutely online shopping. Like I just can't believe how easy that has made life. But not just, I think if you just approach it of, I'll just jump online and order some things, if you're not using those to their, I guess, advantage, then you're not making the most of those opportunities. So for example, I use Woolies because that's my local one. And I just use Woolies because I already get my fruit and veg box delivered. It's mostly just like your staples and a few bits and pieces that I know that my kids really love, which wouldn't always be in season and come in our veggie box. So, but what I do is I've got lists saved. So in your apps where you're doing your online shopping, utilize those lists because it really does save you time. So you can go in and do like your staples, you could do all your cleaning products, you could do all your lunchbox items, whatever it might be, and have different lists saved. So, when you go in there, you don't have to be overwhelmed by all the different options. And then, you're not seeing things where you're just sneaking in a few packets of chips and this and that and whatever. But you just know exactly the brands that you like, what's available, and you can just go tick, 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 and done. And literally within 5-10 minutes, you can have your online shopping done. I think that is great for like your staples and all of that. And then I also found that doing things like a bulk meat order was really good. So doing an online bulk meat order, there's quite a few different ones available, or it might just be going to your local butcher if you've got a good local butcher and buying a bit in bulk, but having that and stocking your freezer, I think is so helpful. You do need to remember the night before to making sure you put it in the fridge to defrost it. That is one of my worst traits. I always forget. But I think those two things have really made everything really quite helpful because it feels like automatic. And sometimes I could now go probably 3 or 4 weeks without going to the supermarket, which is a really long time and is something that has just saved me so much. I used to love going to the supermarket before I had kids, but now it's one thing I will avoid as long as possible. So I think embracing the online shopping and, all of that sort of thing is really great. Obviously, meal prepping is super helpful, but I think having a bit of flexibility in that as well. So maybe it's just picking out the meals for the week, but then assessing, going, okay, well, how much time does that meal take? Can I actually fit that in on that night? Do I need to swap that to another night? Was that food available to me? Is it in season at the moment? No, it's not. Let's swap it for this. So, just having a little bit of flexibility in that. And then the other thing I think is having some kind of seasonal aspect to your food. And I think this is super helpful because when we are talking about not only trying to expose our kids to new food, but we know, I'm sure you've spoken to your listeners a lot about gut health so far, but we know as a very basic summary of gut health that food variety is so good for that. So by having that seasonality, it means that you're always getting something different every season of the year. And so you can really embrace that variety of food for your gut health, but also that variety of food is obviously so great to expose your kids to as well. So some kind of seasonal aspect, whether that's ordering like an online box or whether it's just going to the supermarket and identifying what's in season at the moment. A good trick is to look at the organic produce. You don't have to buy the organic produce, but the organic produce is going to show you what is actually in season at the moment. So then you can know, okay, that's in season. Whether you buy the organic or just the regular, that's totally up to you. But that's a good way to see actually what is in season. And yeah, I found all of those things super helpful in terms of helping to make things a bit more simple for the family.
Yeah, I love that. I think online ordering is just a total game changer. I think you've converted me with the grocery shopping as well, though, because we love like the bulk ordering of meats and things like that. But I still go to the grocery store, and it's probably one of my least favorite things, to be honest. And I really need to like let go of that and just do an online shop. So I'm going to give that a go.
Yeah. And one thing as well that's actually really useful, because some people I think worry, particularly say people like us who are quite health conscious, and maybe you have like your favorite brands of products and stuff like that. So sometimes it's annoying if you order online and they don't have it. So they might do a substitute and then it's not as good and all of that. You can actually put shopper notes. So you can select whether you want a substitute for that or not. And if you do want to substitute, say that brand wasn't available, you could put in the shopper notes what other brands you'd be happy to receive. And I thought that was a really good tip just to help people, because obviously ingredients on certain products can vary widely, even for the same type of product. So it can be helpful just to know that you can actually select what brands of foods you want if the one that you wanted wasn't available.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I also love the tip around eating seasonally as well, because I agree, like it's so important from a nutrient perspective, from gut health, and also just to get that variety of different foods. I think another just tip on that to see what is in season is you can kind of, not always, but you can also sometimes see depending on the price point. So what's in season tends to come down in price when it's out of season, but we're still getting it in because it's imported from somewhere else. The price tends to go up. I know that's a little bit hard to navigate because prices can fluctuate for various other reasons as well. For example, like, stone fruits, they tend to only be around, or the price drops when they're in season. And things like that. So I think it's not only from a nutritional perspective, but it can be really good for saving money and budgeting around groceries as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Can you share with us, just where can listeners find you, the work you do? Is there any ways that they can work with you as well?
Yep. So I do have a new program at the moment, which is called the Family Food Plan. We're currently running it at the moment. So in terms of the doors opening, it's a wait list at the moment to join the next round. So you can jump on. That's essentially a 3-week meal plan, but it has a masterclass series where we talk about a lot of the stuff we've talked about tonight, but just in a lot more detail around how you can actually feed one meal to the whole family and how you can encourage your kids to try new foods, but really foster that healthy relationship with food. So that is available as a wait list, but I do also have a free ebook on my website, which has 10 family-friendly recipes. So you could jump on and grab that straight away. My website is bodygoodfood.com.au, and I do share a lot on Instagram as well. So Nutritionist_Steph Geddes, and you can find me there as well.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Steph. I'll pop all those links in the show notes as well for anyone listening, so that you can go and check out Steph and the work she does and all her beautiful recipes as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at TrisAlexandraNutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.